Hey, welcome back. I am Eric. Figured that since I've been getting some feedback via the YouTube comments, I would go ahead and put my Twitter info up here in case anyone has any comments or questions or feedback or requests about stuff you'd like a little more info on. Please do reach out. I'm happy to try and accommodate that. And thanks again for following along. This is kind of cool. Um, Today I want to talk about color, specifically a color control system that you have seen me using in previous videos called the Gradiator System, which is it's still kind of experimental. I'm still trying to decide how heavily I want to lean into it, but so far I'm very, very excited by the possibilities, and I want to talk a little bit about that. One of the more difficult things to do when you're building a game world made up of assets that come from different sources is to add a sense of cohesion to the assets, to make it feel like they belong in the same place, in the same world, that they're all of the same. And that's really common when you're dealing with like photogrammetry assets. And like all of these rocks here we've been using are assets that were photographed and mapped, uh, but they were from all over the world. They're from different types of rock, different different asset libraries. Um, and it's very easy sometimes to just jam stuff together and have it look incongruous. It doesn't fit together. And honestly, I feel like I'm even committing some crimes using some of these different rocks together because if this were a real scene, I would have spent a lot more time pruning down the library and just having like doing a little geology homework basically. Um, but this is actually really good for what I would like to show off because this is sort of all over the place. Um, in a minute here, I'm gonna remove the color and show you sort of the naked rocks again as they originally were, and that'll give you a better idea of kind of the starting point. But before we get there, I want to talk about why are we even doing this? What's the point? A number of years ago, I was involved in building a game called The Witness. I've got a screenshot here of the island, and learned a couple really valuable lessons. Well, learned lots of valuable lessons in this project, but two in particular I want to cover, which is the notion of world space color identity and reusing assets across a large scale and how flexible that is. What I mean by world space color identity is if you look at this island, I know it's not a perfect top-down shot, but you'll notice that uh, the desert is brown and the grasslands are green and there's some uh, dark mountain color over here. All of that is defined at the world level, right? This was done as a texture that was painted top down the entire island, and as each element is being rendered, it does a lookup on that texture, and that's the color that it gets tinted. Um, a fairly simple technique, but super powerful. Not just because it sort of does an extra layer of work that you simply can't do on an individual asset basis. Uh, Meaning, like if I take a rock that's down here and drag it all the way across the island, it'll just update its color as it moves, which is really nice. But also, from a gameplay perspective, having that localized color identity helps players navigate. It gives visual clarity and visual impact to different shots. And you can do that on an individual per asset basis, having each rock be a different texture or whatever. But having a global color map is a really powerful tool. And so this is using a similar method, but rather than hand painting textures, which works but can be cumbersome. It's cumbersome sometimes because you don't get instantaneous feedback. You got to jump over to Photoshop and do a little painting, and you save the file and re-update. And oh, okay, I see what it looks like, and adjust a little more. Um, I was looking for a method to have more immediate feedback and more interactivity, and have something that's a little bit more complex than a simple texture lookup. And so that led to this system. Um, real quick, I'm gonna rip a bunch of stuff out of the scene and come back in a minute when it's sort of bare bones, and we'll build back up to something similar to this, and it'll make a lot more sense, I think. All right, so I have stripped away all of the the color management from this scene, and we're just looking at the raw assets that I've imported, and immediately you can see that um, things don't really fit together very well. There's the color temperatures are sort of all over the place, and um, it becomes far easier to see which assets are separate meshes, and they don't really blend together as well. Not to mention getting the ground and the rocks to play together. Um, it's a little more difficult. Um, Now that said, there is lots of localized color transition happening, which in some cases is more desirable. But what I'm looking for here is a scene that really looks gorgeous from a distance, broad view, and I'm trying to keep in mind future compositions where it's not just about you staring at the ground, but it's you staring at the landscape as a whole and seeing big color differentials across that broad landscape. And that's sort of what this system is meant to address. So um, I am going to enable what I would consider the sort of a simple level of tint color. This is, in fact, this is so simple. Everything is getting tinted just one flat color right now, and I'll talk a little bit about what's going on. But you'll see I have this color node here up in the air. That this is what I call a gradiator node, and it essentially is dictating to the world around it what color things should be. And so if I, just color picker, right, I can just change my color, and you'll see the entire world changes to match whatever tint I have here. It's very, very rudimentary, and there's nothing really that special about what's going on right now. But almost immediately, you can see that things they lose a little bit of their subtlety. We're going to build that back in a minute, but at its base level, this is basically taking all of the materials on all the rocks and making it a consistent color, which helps blend elements together far better and makes it feel more like it's part of the whole. But this is stupid. I could have done this in the material. There's nothing special about what's going on here. It doesn't really get special until you have more than one node. So I'm just going to copy a node here, and then I'm going to give this a different color. And you'll notice I now have sort of this two-tone thing going on. And as I move this around, you'll see that I actually have control over the positioning of those areas, all in real time. And like I said earlier, instead of painting a Photoshop dock or a texture, uh, I was looking for a solution that would allow me to author color directly in the map across a sort of an agnostic amount of assets. I can have any number of textures reading off of this uh, gradient essentially. I'm going to go ahead and just make a couple other. You can get crazy with the colors. I don't want to get too crazy. I'm going to keep it fairly straightforward. Um, so this will work across large distances. Any number of assets, any number of materials, any number of textures, it'll affect. Now, this is a very, very naive flavor of tinting right now. It's just basically a multiply tinting across the value that's on the base texture. So it's very, very simple. Um, but at its core, I want to show what the system is actually doing here. Um, these little nodes are they're writing into a texture buffer, which is sort of like a utility texture that is being kept track of in the background. And so I'm just going to show this is the texture that's being written out, and the only part we care about is this little bit in the corner here. I'm just going to position that there so we can see it. You'll notice as I move these nodes around, that texture changes. And what it's doing is it is dynamically regenerating the gradient. And if I look top down, you'll see, I'm just dealing with that little corner of the map, but this actually spans across this entire area. You can see that gradient changing as I move these nodes around. And so it's always going to give me a smooth, contiguous color. It's very, very flexible. And what's really nice about it is the code that's used to generate this little thumbnail is fairly complex and expensive, but because I'm rendering it into a texture buffer basically at the very first frame, it just sits there and does no work, and it's no more expensive really than any standard texture lookup, which is performance, keeping performance in mind. But it's all editable in real time, and that's really cool. So hopefully that makes sense what's happening there. But this is still a fairly simple gag that's going on. I'm just doing very basic tinting across the whole texture, and it doesn't give me a whole lot of character to this. It's just kind of brown, right? Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable what I'm calling dual gradiators, which essentially gives me the ability to define not just one tint color, but two tint colors and to do what's called gradient mapping. It's actually a fairly well-known technique in computer graphics. Team Fortress 2 was notorious for using lots of gradient mapping. What gradient mapping is essentially, I'm gonna slide these down so we can sort of look at what's happening. Gradient mapping says rather than defining the color explicitly, you're defining a black and white mask that then interpolates between two separate colors and it builds a gradient, just like in Photoshop or a paint program. So in this case, this color here is my light color. I'm going to set it, the simplest way to illustrate this is just have one be set to white and then have the dark color be set to black. And we're getting this black and white monochrome gradient, right? Um, but you can get really interesting looks if you begin blending those together. So I'm going to go sort of this tan light color, and then let's do like a real rich red chocolatey shadow color. You start to get a little bit more interest in there. Or let's start mixing cool and light colors, and or cool and warm colors. Let's uh, let's set the dark color to actually almost a blue, and set the light color to more of a red, and you get kind of this really interesting mix of colors that's um, far more artistic control and far more compelling. Whether or not it's photorealistic, it's not, but it doesn't mean you can't use a little bit more observation and be careful with your color choices and get really, really interesting mixes of color. But now, because I have the ability to define um, highlight color and shadow color, keep in mind these are building two different networks of gradients. In fact, if I were to go over here, define the shadow color over here as something, say, much lighter, now I can get this almost chalky, um, uh, uh, distinctive different look that is seamlessly blending. Because remember, it's blending now two different sets of gradients together across the whole map. So using this technique, it allows you to do really subtle transitions that you simply can't do any other way across large, vast distances. And so I can transition to something that's almost like a coal, simply by transitioning, my highlight color darker. Uh, and you get this nice contiguous transition across the whole map. And now this is a fairly small scene, so you'll need to picture this across a large distance, but the same concept applies, and really all it's doing is it's generating multiple sets of gradients, and the system, I'm using these two for the rock color. I think this one is the grass. Actually, um, I'm going to show another technique because while we've been using this for color data, which is the easiest to illustrate, um, you can use it for all kinds of crazy things. So let's see what kind of trouble we can get into. I'm going to enable snow. Let's turn snow on for these surfaces. So this is a fairly straightforward snow shader. For any other technical artists out there, it's just doing a standard up vector dot product mask to figure out which surfaces the snow should be on. Um, and this is cool. This is cool. But let's say you have a large map and you want some areas to be snow covered and others to not be, or you want more manual control over that. Um, Same gag applies. So this little gradiator node here is now controlling the density of the snow. I'm going to just by itself. Remember, this is the only one in this network. So as I dial it up and down, you can see it erodes snow from the entire scene or replaces it from the entire scene. Sort of does this build-up effect, which is just kind of nice. But just like with the color gradients, if I were to create a second node and then transition to a darker color, I now have control over locally where the snow is and where the snow is not. And so if I want, let's say I want a snowy scene and I want the snow to sort of like disappear as we get close to the water. We can say let's say it's a warm body water or something along those lines. We get this really nice subtle transition of where the snow coverage is in a completely non-destructive way that I can edit at any time because of how the pipeline works. Or if I want to come in here and modify it and say over here I want really solid snow coverage. I want solid heavy snow. And then by the water I want no snow whatsoever. And then let's say try and locate where did I put another Gradiator node? It's here somewhere. And then over here, I want more spotty coverage, just a little bit of snow on the tops of surfaces. And so by using these three nodes and figuring out where they're positioned in the scene, I can very, very easily control that sort of stuff and see interactively in real time, right in the editor, what I'm going to get. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully the fact that we were able to do that all in just a few minutes very flexibly conveys like why these types of tools are so important to me. I think when used right, you can make drastic changes all the way through the project instead of having to pre-plan things like color and snow covers and that sort of thing. The idea is to make the tools as flexible and as sweeping as possible, so that you have that kind of control the whole way through, and you can make bold bold decisions and not feel like you're committing yourself to any one path or one choice. So I think that just about covers what I wanted to go over with the Gradiator system. This will evolve over time, but right now I'm feeling pretty excited about where it's pointed, and we'll see where it leads. Switch back to this. Uh, Let me know if you have any questions or have any specific topics you'd like me to cover in more detail, and I'll see what I can do. And until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.